strip the concrete away and travel back 700 years. That's what we're going to do now. So as this does this, you'll notice there's still certain patterns there, familiar, that I've already pointed out, but it looks completely different. So now what we can do, we get a good view now of the Norman castle there at Stirling, and a clear view of the dark road running through, which is the old Roman road. Now it's that Roman road that was of great importance during the medieval period and the Battle of Bannockburn, because that was the main umbilical route to get to the north of Scotland. And the land north of the River Forth, which is just here, back in medieval times was believed to be an island. And if you wanted to control the north of Scotland back then, and because of that belief of it being an island, you had to control Stirling, Stirling Castle, and that river crossing there, Stirling Bridge. Now, even though we're here to talk about the Battle of Bannockburn, it's wrong of me not to mention the fact that there was a famous battle fought there, which was also a victory for the Scots. And one of the architects for that victory, Sir William Wallace, his monument sits there on the Abbey Craig. But you won't see it because we stripped the concrete away. Now, if I draw your attention to this hillside there, this is Gillies Hill, famous in folklore for the location of the small folk, but more importantly, geography-wise, when it rains, when it snows, and the snow melts, that hillside feeds two rivers. One of them, you've already had a sight of it, is the Bannockburn, running through the landscape now, all the way from the west to this area here, known as Winds of Milton, which was called Milton Ford, and that's how it will be referred to as. Then the burning graves into the landscape, carving out a massive chasm as it passes this area here, Balkidrick Ridge, then onto this delta plain area here, this region known as the Carse. The other river, the Pal Stream, runs through the medieval town of St Ninians, down the ridges onto the Carse, and joins the Bannockburn there. And then later, towards the end of your narration, another important area is here, Canvas Kenneth Abbey, which is the location where King Robert the Bruce holds quite a few of his parliaments, because of the proximity it has with the battlefield. And that brings us to the battlefield, which is now being narrowed down by our academics to being along the ridge here, Balkidrick Ridge, in this area of the Carse, with King Edward camping in this area there. And engagements on the first day near Winds of Milton, just here, with the placing of the Scottish traps, the famous incident between the Boone and King Robert, and at St Ninians, Randolph's first forming of the first Schiltrum, which drove back the English vanguard, led by Beaumont and Clifford. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, now you're established with the geography in front of you, I yield to our experts, and they are Dr. Tony Pollard from the TV series Two Men in a Trench and The Quest for Bannockburn, with his friend Neil Oliver, who've helped us design this map, and the other academic is a very top historian, Dr. Fiona Watson, who in my opinion is one of the leading historians on the Battle of Bannockburn. So to them, I now place you in their care. So thank you for listening.
I'm Dr. Tony Pollard.
And I'm Dr. Fiona Watson. Welcome to the real Battle of Bannockburn. On the 23rd of June 1314, the English have a very quick march to make from Falkirk to fulfil the deadline. So they come up the Roman road and they stop on the southeast side of the Bannockburn at Milton Ford. Now, at that point, they have technically relieved the castle, and Sir Philip Newbery is allowed to come from the castle through the line of the Scots to the English, and he tells Edward II this, but Edward II says, well, I'm not going anywhere, we're here to give battle.
While the English are advancing through Scotland, Robert Bruce and the Scottish army have been putting their time to very good use. They've been preparing the ground, digging pits, possibly around the area of Milton Ford, where the English will cross into the New Park, which is where the Scots are situated to the south of the castle. But they've also been training hard, because moving these Schiltrums, these mass bodies of spearmen, is going to be very important in any battle that's fought. But the point is that the Scots have the option to fight, and this is important. And that's possibly displayed in the formation that the Scots have adopted on day one, because the vanguard, the lead element, led by Edward Bruce, is actually closest to the castle, to the north, whereas the rear guard, with the king, is closest to the enemy advance. So this may mean that they're formed so that they can fight a retreat to the northwest if things go badly for them. As it is, the English play into their hands and probably because of the pits, some of the army moves down towards the lower ground, but some of the army crosses the ford. Now, whether the Scots deliberately let them through, we don't know, but there we get this challenge between the Scottish king and this English knight de Bohun, which Robert Bruce wins. He kills de Bohun. Meanwhile, the English knights or at least some of the English knights, under Beaumont and Clifford, move down around the lower ground, end up beneath St Ninians, closer to the castle, and there they are engaged by Randolph's Chiltern of Scottish spearmen. And the English come off very badly in that encounter. It's almost like a dry run for day 2. And they can't get anywhere near the Scots because of their long spears, and they end up even throwing their axes into them in frustration. Several of them are killed, and they have no option but to retire. So already on day 1, we've got 2 Scottish victories. Edward II then makes the fateful decision to move his army off the high ground onto the Carse. He may not be able to move anywhere else, and so he moves down onto the flat ground of the Carse, probably very unpleasant, wet ground, and there they've got to build bridges to get across that burn using roofs and doors from local houses. And it seems to take them most of the night. But I would argue that the reason they're putting so much effort into this is that they need to get across the burn to its north side where the ground is slightly firmer. And if they're going to have any chance of supporting forces, they need to make that move. And there they make their camp and prepare for battle, which is clearly now going to be day 2, if Robert Bruce decides to attack.
And that's the crucial point. Robert Bruce has had a good day on the 23rd. He may have felt he'd done enough to show that he was militarily in command of this area. But then a very interesting thing happened. A Scottish knight in the English army, Sir Alexander Seton, defects. Seton leaves the English camp in High Dudgeon and goes to Bruce and says, look, morale in the English camp is very low. There is extremely poor leadership. You can fight. You stand and fight and you will win. So Bruce puts it to his men and they all shout, yes, we will fight for freedom, glory, riches, whatever. And then he also then says, okay, if we're going to fight, there's 2 stipulations. 1, you must not take any booty. That's not uncommon. But secondly, you must not take any prisoners. That's very unusual. Until the battle is won, and then you can have as much as you like.
All of that preparation seems to have worked, and Bruce is satisfied that they have the advantage, and he decides to engage in full battle against the English army. And on the morning of the 24th, the Scots appear out of the wood. The 2 armies advance on one another. And now here is a debate as to whether the Scots move off the high ground, down the ridge of Balquhidderach, and appear out of the trees there onto the flat ground of the Carse, or whether they allow the English to climb up that steep ridge and face them on the higher ground. That might also work for the Scots, because if they attack just as the English reach the top of the ridge, when they're still in disunity because they've had to lead their horses up on foot, the Scots, if they attack quickly enough, may get them off guard. And there is one account by Sir Thomas Gray which mentions the fact that the English, almost in a panic, in a great hurry, have to mount up on their horses. That's interesting because it can be read one of 2 ways, which most of the accounts actually can. One is that the English are in their camp on the Carse and are unprepared as the Scots appear on the Carse and advance on them, and they have to mount up very quickly to fight these men on foot. They want to be on horseback. The other is that they've climbed up onto the high ground to face the Scots there, but the Scots attack them almost as soon as their mounted men, at that point on foot, hit the top of the ridge. But that doesn't really matter. We've now narrowed down the battle between the ridge line and the Carse. The exciting thing is that we have some evidence for the battle on the Carse.
The first thing that the English see, as Tony says, is the Scots advancing. And that takes them by surprise because they really did not expect the Scots to be there. The Scots then kneel in prayer, and certainly the English later explained the Scottish victory by their godliness, the fact that they really did the right things. Edward Bruce's Chiltern, the Scottish vanguard, then approaches the English. And the Earl of Gloucester, he then throws himself with the English vanguard at the Scots. They charge, and as with the previous day against Randolph, they fail. And there is a complete massacre of these knights. The Scots know that these are really rich and impressive men, but they do not take any prisoners. These guys are killed, which is highly unusual for this period. and they start to push the English. And because the English are hemmed in, they cannot spread out into their brigades the way they would like, and the Scots just start to push and to push. The foot soldiers behind can't do anything. And very importantly, for once, the Scottish cavalry perform a very important task, because they go down and stop the English archers from coming out to deploy, because obviously archers could really make big holes in the Scottish shooters, but Robert Keith's men stop them from doing that.
And it goes very, very badly wrong for the English, and they are pushed back against the Bannockburn, and we have accounts of men drowning, of being so many dead men in the burn that you could walk over it dry shod. And there's one description of a great ditch, and you can see the great ditch today. It's this chasm which runs down from Milton Bog, down near the Roman road, all the way to the east to where the Bannockburn debouches onto the flat ground of the Carse. But whether it's in there or on the burn on the Carse that these Englishmen drown is neither here nor there. Now we're hopeful that we have a small amount of archaeological evidence for the battle down on the Carse. If we're right, it looks as though we have evidence of English knights coming off their horses on the banks of the Bannockburn, desperately trying to cross back over the burn, probably in the same place they came northwards, in an absolute panic. And many, many men are killed. Edward II retreats to the castle where he hopes to find sanctuary, but common sense would dictate if he goes inside its walls, it will fall to the Scots and he will be captured. And so he's warned off, and he comes down along the west side of the new park and heads for Linlithgow, and then finds his way on the east coast at Dunbar, where he takes boat to safety back in England, leaving a lot of his army dead on the field of Bannockburn.
And as a result, in November 1314, very importantly, at Campus Kenneth Abbey, and there's no accident that it's there, Bruce pushes through his ultimatum, and all the Scottish landowners who haven't accepted him as king do so, because they have no choice now.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is the real Battle of Bannockburn. Now, before we proceed with you for the rest of your visit, can I ask all of our audience up on the upper balcony, for your direction, you will be the first to go to our epilogue, which will be the final part of